The early morning mist clung to the valley floor like a heavy morning veil, turning the red rocks of the Utah-Arizona border into ghostly, indistinct shapes. It was a cold, damp grayness that seeped through wool and leather alike, chilling a man to his very marrow. The rain from the previous night had turned the wagon ruts into thick, clinging porridge, and the air smelled of wet sagebrush and pine needles somewhere in the distance. Far beyond the ridge where the junipers twisted toward the sky, a wolf howled a lonely, hollow sound that echoed the emptiness of the land. It was a beautiful country, but it was a country that did not care if a man lived or died. Kayazi stood on the porch of the trading post, listening to that distant howl. He did not shiver. At 32 years of age, he had learned that shivering did not bring warmth. Only movement did. He was a Navajo scout, though he worked mostly for himself these days, guiding freight wagons or carrying messages through the rough passes where wheels could not go. He was a man built of lean muscle and silence. His black hair was cut shorter than was traditional, a concession to the practicalities of living on the fringe of the white man's world. But he wore a turquoise bead braided into a leather cord around his neck, a reminder of who he was and where he came from. He checked the cinch on his horse, a sturdy bay mare with a white blaze on her nose. His movements were economical and precise. He treated the animal with more respect than he accorded most people. People lied. People made promises they had no intention of keeping. A horse simply was what it was. Kai ran a hand over the leather of his saddle. He carried a small knife at his belt, the blade sharp enough to shave with, and a Winchester rifle in the scabbard. He hated debt. He hated the feeling of owing another man a single breath. In this territory, owing a favor was more dangerous than owing money. Money could be earned. Favors were usually collected in blood or dignity. The door to the trading post creaked open behind him. Silas, the trader who ran this outpost, stepped out, wiping his hands on a stained apron. "Coffee is cold." "Kai," Silas said, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the mud. "But it is black." "Cold is fine," Kai said. His voice was low, rough like gravel shifting in a stream bed. He took the tin cup Silas offered. The liquid was bitter, but the caffeine was necessary. Inside the post, the air was thick with the smell of cured tobacco, sawdust, and stale grease. It was a place where men passed through but rarely stayed. "You got that packet for the mining camp?" Silas asked. "In the saddlebag." Kai replied, "Good. There is $5 in it for you when you get back. Make sure Miller signs for it. I do not trust that man as far as I can throw a mule." Kai nodded. He did not need to be told to get a signature. He understood the rules. Paper was the god the white men worshipped. If it was written down, it was true. If it was not written down, it never happened. Kai found this amusing, considering how often the papers turned out to be lies. But he played the game because it put flour and coffee in his saddlebags. "Say," Silas said, leaning against the doorframe, his eyes narrowing as he looked out at the mist. "You hear about the men asking around down at the crossing? 3 of them? Hard types." Kai took a slow sip of the cold coffee. "Asking about what?" "A girl. Said she ran off from a contract in Denver. Said she stole something." Kai's expression did not change. His face remained a mask of indifference, a shield he had perfected over a decade of navigating the spaces between his people and the settlers. "People are always running. People are always stealing." "True enough," Silas grunted. "But these men, they had badges, or at least one of them did. A deputy star looked like, but he didn't walk like a lawman. He walked like a man looking for a fight." "Not my business," Kai said, handing the empty cup back. "No," Silas agreed. "Best keep it that way. But if you see a woman wandering where she ought not to be, you steer clear. Trouble follows skirts out here, especially the ones with a price on their heads." Kai turned back to his horse. He adjusted the stirrup leather. He had no interest in runaway girls or the men chasing them. His life was simple: ride, deliver, get paid, survive. He carried scars on his ribs from a knife fight 5 years ago in Santa Fe, and scars on his soul from things he had seen during the wars before that. He wanted no more of either. He swung into the saddle with a fluid grace. The mare shifted her weight, ready to move. "Watch the pass," Silas called out. "Storm is brewing. The air feels heavy." "I know," Kai said. He touched the brim of his hat, then turned the mare toward the trail that vanished into the fog. 20 miles to the east, on a road that was little more than a scar across the red earth. Clara Whitfield sat on a flat rock, trying to catch her breath. She was not dressed for this country. Her boots, made of thin leather suitable for city sidewalks, were scuffed and coated in red mud. Her dress was a simple gray wool, practical for a seamstress in Denver, but here, against the vast, violent backdrop of the canyons, it looked fragile and absurd. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The damp cold of the morning seemed to have fingers. It pried into the seams of her clothes and settled on her skin. Clara was 24 years old, though she felt much older today. She had a face that people often described as sweet or quiet. She was not a beauty that turned heads in a ballroom. She was the kind of woman who went unnoticed in the corner, mending a hem or pouring tea. She had been raised in a house where silence was a virtue and obedience was survival. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the letter. The paper was soft from being folded and unfolded 100 times. The ink was slightly smeared in one corner where a drop of rain had caught it days ago. A good man, established in the mountains, a trading post and land of his own, needs a wife to manage the home and bring gentleness to a hard life. Respectful, Christian. It was signed Mr. Arthur P. Wilson. It was her lifeline. Clara smoothed the paper over her knee. Her hands were red from the cold. She was a seamstress. Her hands were her livelihood. They were accustomed to holding a needle, to feeling the texture of silk and rough cotton, to finding the weakness in a fabric and making it strong again. She carried a small spool of blue thread and a needle in her bodice, a habit she could not break. It was her talisman. If something ripped, she could fix it, but she could not fix the past 2 weeks. She closed her eyes, trying to push away the memory of the room in Denver, the smell of stale cigar smoke, the heavy hand of Mr. Garrett, her employer, landing on her shoulder. The way he had smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes, when he told her that her mother's debts were now hers. "You are a pretty thing. Clara, we can work something out." She had not waited to find out what working something out meant. She had taken the few dollars she had saved in a tin under her mattress, grabbed her mother's Bible and this letter from the agency she had visited in secret, and she had run. She had run until the money ran out. Now, she was walking. The stagecoach driver had let her off at the crossroads 5 miles back, pointing vaguely toward the foothills. "That is the way to the post, miss," he had said, eyeing her with a mixture of pity and suspicion. "Though I do not know why a lady would walk it alone." She was alone because she had no choice. Clara stood up. Her legs trembled. She was hungry, and her throat felt like it was lined with dust, but she had to keep moving. Mr. Wilson was waiting. A husband, a home, a place where she did not have to look over her shoulder. "Just a few more miles," she whispered to herself. Her voice sounded small, swallowed instantly by the vast silence of the canyon. She began to walk again. The mud sucked at her heels. She tried to step carefully, to keep her dignity intact, but the land did not care about dignity. It was raw and wild. She looked at the towering cliffs of red rock, streaked with mineral stains that looked like dried blood. It was terrifying, yet there was a strange beauty to it. It was open. In Denver, the buildings crowded the sky, blocking out the light. Here, the sky was endless. She thought of the needle and thread in her pocket. She was a woman who mended things. She was trying to mend her own life, stitching together a future from a scrap of paper and a desperate hope. Kai rode steadily, the mare picking her way over the loose shale of the upper trail. The fog was lifting, revealing the jagged spine of the ridge. He kept his eyes moving, scanning the horizon, the brush, the shadows under the trees. It was a habit, not a choice. He saw the tracks of a coyote near a dried creek bed. He saw a hawk circling a thermal updraft, hunting. He saw the way the wind was turning the leaves of the aspen trees upside down, exposing their silvery undersides. Storm coming, he thought. By afternoon, he thought about what Silas had said. Men asking questions. A runaway. In his experience, everyone in the West was running from something. Some ran from the law. Some ran from their wives. Some ran from their own memories. He had seen men come to these mountains thinking they could reinvent themselves, only to find that they had brought their demons with them in their saddlebags. He had his own ghosts. He remembered the long walk to Bosque Redondo when he was a boy. He remembered the hunger. He remembered the promises made by the government men, promises that turned to dust as soon as they were spoken. That was why he lived the way he did now on the edge, beholden to no one. He worked for the white men because it was the only way to survive in the world they had made, but he did not trust them. He touched the scar on his shoulder. It throbbed slightly with the change in weather. He pulled the collar of his coat up. He was not lonely, he told himself. Loneliness implied a desire for company. He desired peace, and peace was found in solitude. Clara stumbled. Her foot caught on a hidden root, and she went down hard on her hands and knees. The sharp gravel bit into her palms. She gasped, tears stinging her eyes. She stayed there for a moment, on the ground, head bowed. She was so tired. She had not eaten a full meal in 2 days. "Please," she whispered to the rocks. "Please let him be there." She forced herself up. She brushed the dirt from her skirt. She checked the letter again, just to make sure it was still there. It was her passport to safety. She had to believe that. If she stopped believing that, the fear would overtake her. The fear that Mr. Garrett was right behind her. The fear that she was just a foolish girl who had walked into a trap. She remembered her mother's voice. "Be good. Clara, keep your head down. Work hard, and the Lord will provide." Her mother had worked hard until her fingers were twisted with rheumatism, and her lungs were filled with cotton dust. And she had died in a rented room with peeling wallpaper. Clara wanted more than that. She did not want to be rich. She just wanted to be safe. She wanted to belong somewhere where she wasn't afraid of the knock on the door. She looked up at the sky. The clouds were gathering, dark and bruised-looking, piling up against the peaks. The wind was picking up, carrying the scent of ozone and rain. "I have to keep going," she said. She was not a pioneer. She was not a warrior. She was a seamstress who knew how to make a dress fit perfectly, how to turn a collar so it looked new. She was soft. She knew that. The world was hard, but she had walked 1,000 miles. That had to count for something. Kai stopped his horse at the crest of a hill. From here, he could see the valley stretching out below, a patchwork of scrub brush and red earth. He took a sip of water from his canteen. He looked down at the trail that wound through the canyon floor. It was the main route to the crossing, the one the wagons used. Something caught his eye, a speck of movement against the red and brown of the landscape. He squinted. It was far away, perhaps 2 miles, a figure, walking. He watched for a long time. The figure moved slowly, erratically. It was not a man. The stride was too short, and the shape was wrong. It was a woman, alone. He frowned. No woman walked this road alone, not unless she had lost a horse, or a husband, or her mind. He thought of Silas's warning. Trouble follows skirts out here. He should turn away. He should ride up the ridge, take the high trail to the mining camp, and deliver his packet. It was not his business. If she was the runaway the men were looking for, getting involved would only bring the law down on him. A Navajo interfering with a white woman even to help was asking for a rope or a bullet. The law of the land was written in black and white, and he was on the wrong side of the color line. He turned the mare's head toward the high trail. He rode 10 yards. Then he stopped. The wind howled through the canyon, a sound like a child crying. Kai swore softly in his own language. He looked back at the darkening sky. The storm was going to be bad. Hail, maybe. Flash floods in the washes. If he left her there, whoever she was, she would be dead by morning. The cold would take her. or the coyotes. He sat there for a long moment, the reins loose in his hands. He was a man who calculated risks. This was a bad risk. But he was also a man who had seen too much death. He had seen women and children die on the long walk because no one would help. He had promised himself, a long time ago, that he would not be like the men who watched and did nothing. Freedom, he thought, was not just about riding where you wanted. Freedom was the right to choose who you were. And he was not a man who left a woman to die in the storm. He turned the mare around. He guided her down the slope, moving toward the tiny, struggling figure in the distance. As he rode, he checked the knife at his belt again, just in case. The first drops of rain began to fall, cold and heavy as lead shot. The valley waited, silent and vast, indifferent to the small drama unfolding on its breast. 2 lives, spun from different threads, one silk and desperate, one leather and scarred, were about to knot together. And the storm was coming. The wind bit through the canyon with renewed ferocity, whipping up devils of red dust that danced before the coming storm. It was midday, though the sky was so bruised with purple and charcoal clouds that it felt like dusk was already descending. Kayazi urged the mare down the slope, the horse's hooves sliding in the loose shale. He did not call out. He simply rode until he was alongside the figure stumbling through the sagebrush. Up close, she looked worse than she had from the ridge. Her face was pale, the color of old parchment, standing in stark contrast to the wind-burned flush on her cheeks. Her lips were cracked and blue. She was shivering so violently that her teeth chattered, a sound like dry bones rattling in a cup. She wore a hat that had once been stylish, but it was now battered and drooping, pinned desperately to hair that was coming unraveled. Clara stopped when she saw the horse. She looked up at the rider, her eyes glassy and unfocused. She did not see a man. She saw a looming shape against the gray sky. She swayed, her knees unlocking. "Help!" she whispered. The word was barely a breath, snatched away by the wind. She pitched forward. Kai moved with the speed of a striking snake. He kicked his feet free of the stirrups and slid from the saddle, catching her just before she hit the hard earth. She was shockingly light, nothing but bird bones and heavy wool. Through the layers of her dress, he could feel the cold radiating off her skin. She was in the early stages of freezing. Even though the air was not yet at freezing point, the wind and the damp had leached the heat right out of her. "Steady," Kai said, his voice a low rumble. She blinked, trying to focus on his face. She pulled back slightly, a flicker of fear cutting through her exhaustion. I am going to the Wilson Ranch," she stammered, the words slurring together. "I must not be late." "There is no ranch here," Kai said flatly. "And you are not walking anywhere." He did not wait for her permission. He lifted her, ignoring her weak protest, and set her onto the saddle. He swung up behind her, wrapping one arm around her waist to keep her upright. She was stiff, holding herself away from him as much as she could, clinging to a shred of propriety that was meaningless in this wilderness. "The trading post is close," he told her. "Hold the pommel." He turned the mare back toward the wooden structure he had left less than an hour ago. The journey took 20 minutes, but to Clara, it felt like a lifetime of jarring motion. When they arrived, the trading post was shuttered against the approaching storm, though smoke still curled from the chimney. Kai dismounted and pulled her down. Her legs gave way the moment they touched the ground. He supported her weight, guiding her not to the door, but to the sheltered bench beneath the wide overhang of the porch. It was out of the wind, protected by stacks of firewood and barrels of salted pork. He sat her down on the bench. "Stay." He went to the rain barrel, dipped a ladle, and brought it to her. "Drink, slowly." Clara took the ladle with trembling hands. She spilled as much as she swallowed, the water trailing down her chin. She wiped it away with a frantic, shamed gesture. She straightened her spine, smoothing her dirty skirt. "I apologize," she said, her voice stronger now that the water had wet her throat. "I am not usually so frail. I have walked a long way." Kai leaned against the support post, crossing his arms. He studied her. She was terrified. He could see that. She looked at his dark skin, his long hair, the knife at his belt, and she was trying very hard not to show her fear. "You are looking for a husband?" Kai said. It was not a question. Clara nodded. "Mr. Arthur Wilson. He sent for me. I have the letter." She began to fumble in her pocket, her fingers clumsy with cold. She produced the folded, worn paper. "He gave me directions. He said his land borders the trading post. He said he would be watching for the stage." Kai looked at the empty landscape. "I have lived in these mountains for 10 years. There is no Arthur Wilson. There is no ranch bordering this post." Clara staring at him, her chest heaving. "That is not possible. The letter, it is official. It is from the Rocky Mountain Matrimonial Agency." "Let me see it." She hesitated, clutching the paper to her chest. It was her only proof of existence, her only claim to a place in the world. But the look in the scout's eyes was not cruel. It was simply unyielding. She handed it to him. Kai unfolded the paper. He did not read the flowery words about love and Christian duty. He looked at the things that mattered. He looked at the ink. He looked at the seal at the bottom. "This seal," Kai said, tapping the red wax with a calloused finger. "It is supposed to be a government registration stamp." "Yes," Clara said breathlessly. "It makes it legal." "No," Kai said. "It makes it a lie." He held the paper up so she could see. "Look at the edge of the stamp. It says DG's. That stands for Denver General Store. It is a stamp used for receipts on flour and sugar. And the handwriting," he squinted at the signature. "The name of the location is spelled Milford Crossing. But the town down the valley is Milford. The writer of this letter has never been here." He looked at a map and guessed. Clara felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her lightheaded. "But I paid the fee. I bought the ticket." "You paid a ghost," Kai said, handing the letter back. "Or a thief." Clara stared at the paper. The words seemed to swim before her eyes. A good man. A home. It was all ink, just cheap ink on cheap paper. "I traveled 1,000 miles, she whispered. The horror of it was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest. "I have no money left. I have no ticket back." "There is no back," Kai said gently, though the truth was hard. "The pass is closing with the storm. The stage does not run in this weather." Clara stood up. She had to stand up, or she would scream. She walked to the edge of the porch, looking out at the desolation. "Then what am I to do? Where am I to go?" "That depends," Kai said, "on who is chasing you." Clara stiffened. She turned slowly to face him. "I do not know what you mean." "A woman does not walk into the desert alone unless she is running away from something worse than the desert," Kai said. "And men with guns are asking questions in town." Before Clara could answer, a sound cut through the wind. Crack. It was distant, muffled by the hills, but unmistakable. A gunshot, then the faint, rhythmic thud of hooves striking hard earth. Kai's demeanor changed instantly. The stillness vanished. He moved to the edge of the porch, his eyes scanning the road to the east. "3 riders," he said, his voice low. "Maybe 2 miles out. They are moving fast." Clara grabbed the railing. Is it them?" "Who are they?" Kai demanded. He turned to her, his dark eyes boring into hers. "If I am to help you, you tell me the truth, now." Clara trembled. The shame was a hot coal in her throat. "Mr. Garrett," she choked out. "In Denver. He owns the boarding house where my mother died. He owns the dress shop where I worked. He is your husband." "No." The denial was sharp. "He wanted to be, or he wanted something like that." She hugged her arms around herself. "He said I owed him for my mother's medicine, for the funeral. He said the debt was $500. He said I could work it off in his private rooms." Kai's jaw tightened. He knew men like Garrett. The frontier was full of them, men who looked at the weak and saw only opportunity. "I refused," Clara said, her voice breaking. "I found the advertisement for the marriage. I thought, if I was married, legally, he could not touch me. So I took the money from the shop till it was my wages. He had not paid me in 2 months, and I ran. But if he catches me, he will call it theft, Kai finished. And the law will believe him. He will drag me back, Clara said, tears finally spilling over. He said I am his property until the debt is paid. He will make me. She could not finish the sentence. The horror of what awaited her in Denver was worse than the cold, worse than the wolves. The sound of hooves was louder now. The wind carried the shouts of men urging their horses on. Kai looked at Clara. He saw a woman who was broken, exhausted, and cornered. He saw the way she clutched that fake letter as if it could still save her. He looked at the storm clouds, now heavy and black directly overhead. The first stones of hail began to click against the wooden roof of the porch. He had a choice. He could walk away. He could go inside the post, tell Silas he found a stray, and let the white men settle their own affairs. It was the safe choice. It was the smart choice. Helping her meant defying a man with money and likely a badge. It meant putting himself between a white woman and white law. But he remembered the look in the eyes of the women at Bosque Redondo, the look of being trapped, the look of being owned. He swore softly. "Get up," Kai said. Clara looked at him, confused. "What?" "Get up. You cannot stay here. If they find you on the porch, they will take you. But the storm is your friend," Kai said. "It hides tracks." He grabbed her arm, not roughly, but with an urgency that brooked no argument. He pulled her toward the side of the trading post, where a stack of hay bales created a narrow, dark alcove against the log wall. "But you," Clara stammered. "You will get in trouble. They will hurt you." "I am used to trouble," Kai said. He pushed her into the shadows of the alcove. He threw a heavy canvas tarp over the hay, creating a small, invisible cave. "Get in, curled up small. Do not move. Do not cough." Clara hesitated. She looked at his face. It was a hard face, sharp-angled and unsmiling, but there was a depth to it that she had not seen in the faces of the men in Denver. "Why?" she asked. "Why help me?" Kai paused. He looked toward the road, where the riders were now coming into view, dark shapes against the gray curtain of rain. "Because the debt is paid," he said cryptically. "Now listen to me." He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the rising wind. "If they come asking, you let me speak. You stay silent and stay alive." He dropped the tarp, plunging her into darkness. Clara huddled in the scratchy hay, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She heard Kai's boots crunching on the gravel as he walked back to the front of the post. She heard the creak of leather and the jingle of spurs as the riders reined in. "Ho there!" a voice shouted, rough and arrogant. "You, Indian, you see a girl come this way." Clara clamped her hand over her mouth. She closed her eyes and prayed to a god she wasn't sure was listening. While outside, the hail began to fall in earnest, pounding against the earth like 1,000 tiny hammers. The game of survival had begun. The hail hammered against the wooden roof of the trading post like 1,000 erratic drummers, a deafening cacophony that drowned out the groan of the wind. Inside the main room, the air was thick with tension and the smell of wet wool. Kai stood by the counter, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert, watching the 3 men who had just shoved their way in from the storm. The leader was a man with a tin star pinned to a coat that had seen better decades. He was thick around the middle, with a face flushed by whiskey and cold, and he carried the arrogance of a man who believed the law was whatever he said it was. Flanking him were 2 hired hands, men with hard eyes and holsters tied low on their thighs, the kind of men who sold their violence by the hour. "I'm losing my patience. Red?" The deputy spat, shaking rain from his hat. "We tracked the prince to the porch. The girl is here. Now bring her out, or I will arrest you for obstruction of justice." Kai did not flinch at the slur. He held the piece of paper the deputy had shoved at him, studying it with agonizing slowness. "This warrant," Kai said, his voice cutting through the noise of the storm. "It is interesting." "It is a legal document," the deputy snarled. "Signed by Judge Miller in Denver. The date is smeared," Kai observed, tilting the paper toward the lantern. And it lists the fugitive as a Clara Whitman. You said you were looking for a Clara Whitfield. The deputy blinked, caught off guard. It is a clerical error. Does not matter. She is a thief. She stole $500. A clerical error, Kai repeated, his tone dry. And your jurisdiction ends at the county line, 40 miles east of here. This is Navajo territory. Under federal oversight, or did the map change while I was drinking my coffee? The hired hand on the left took a step forward, his hand drifting toward his revolver. Enough talk. We searched the place. You can search, Kai said, dropping the paper onto the counter. But if you break anything, Silas will charge you double. As the men pushed past him, kicking over a chair and tearing down a curtain that separated the back room, Kai's eyes darted to the rear window. It was unlatched. He had given Clara the signal 3 minutes ago, when the horses had first ridden up. A shout came from the back. Window is open. She went out the back. The deputy spun around, his face purple with rage. Get the horses. She cannot have gone far in this ice. Kai moved then. He did not run. He simply ceased to be standing still. He shoulder-checked the deputy hard enough to send the man stumbling into a display of canned peaches, creating a chaotic clatter of metal and cursing. By the time the hired hands had drawn their weapons, Kai had vaulted over the porch railing and into the mud. He whistled sharply. The bay mare, trained to his command, trotted out from the shadows of the stable, saddled and ready. He saw Clara crouching behind the water trough, shivering violently, her dress soaked through. Up, Kai commanded, swinging into the saddle and extending an arm. Clara did not hesitate. Fear gave her a strength she did not know she possessed. She grabbed his forearm, and with a heave that strained his shoulder, he pulled her up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face in his coat. Hold tight, he warned. The mare surged forward just as the trading post door banged open. A gunshot cracked, the sound flat and ugly against the storm. A splinter of wood flew from the fence post near the horse's head. Kai guided the mare not toward the road, but straight toward the ridge, a path that looked like suicide to anyone who did not know the land. There, one of the pursuers shouted. They are heading for the rim! The chase was on. The ground was treacherous, a slurry of mud and ice pellets. The pursuers were on fresh horses, but they were city riders, or at least plains riders. They did not know how to navigate the slick, shifting rock of the high country. Kai did. He knew which patches of shale would hold and which would slide. They reached a narrow defile, a slot canyon where the walls rose up like the sides of a cathedral. The path narrowed until there was barely room for one horse. They are gaining, Clara cried out, her voice thin with panic close to his ear. Not for long, Kai said. He pushed the mare hard up the incline. Ahead, the main trail, the one the wagon trains used, had been undercut by the flash flood from the storm. A 10-foot section of the road had simply vanished, sliding down into the churning brown water of the wash below. Kai did not slow down. He veered left, driving the horse up a steep, rocky goat track that bypassed the washout. The mare scrambled, hooves striking sparks against the stone, her muscles bunching and releasing with powerful rhythm. They crested the rise just as the pursuers reached the washout below. Kai reined in for a second. Looking back, the deputy's horse skidded to a halt at the edge of the precipice, nearly throwing its rider into the flood. The men were shouting, shaking their fists, but they could not follow. The wagon road was gone, and they would never find the entrance to the goat track in this weather. We are clear, Kai said, though he did not relax. But we cannot stay in the open. The temperature is dropping. They rode for another hour, climbing higher into the timberline where the pine trees grew thick and twisted. The hail turned to a heavy, wet snow. Clara's grip around his waist was loosening, her body stiff with cold. Kai found what he was looking for, a shallow depression beneath a massive overhang of sandstone, protected by a screen of juniper bushes. It was an old sheep camp, used by Basque herders years ago. It was dry, out of the wind, and defensible. He slid off the horse and reached up for Clara. She was effectively frozen in place. He had to pry her fingers from his coat. When he pulled her down, her legs buckled, and she fell against his chest. For a moment, he held her not as a lover, but as a source of heat. She was shaking so hard it felt like she was vibrating. "Inside," he ordered gently, guiding her to the back of the overhang where the dry sand was deep and soft. He did not sit with her immediately. Clara watched, dazed. As he went back to the horse, he was efficient, almost mechanical in his care. He loosened the cinch but did not remove the saddle, keeping the blanket warm on the mare's back. He checked the animal's hooves for stones. He took a piece of burlap from his saddlebag and wrapped the mare's legs, protecting the tendons from the biting cold. Only when the horse was secure did he turn his attention to the human. He gathered dried juniper branches and dead sagebrush, stacking them with the precision of an architect. Within minutes, he had a small fire crackling. It was not a roaring blaze that would be wasteful and too visible, but a tight, hot fire that threw heat outward rather than up. "Come close," he said. Clara crawled toward the fire. She held her hands out, wincing as the blood began to flow back into her fingers. The pain was sharp, like needles. Kai took his canteen and poured a small amount of water into a tin cup, setting it near the coals to warm. He sat opposite her, keeping the fire between them. "You ride well," Clara said, her voice raspy. "For a moment, I thought we were going to die on those rocks." "The horse rides well," Kai corrected. "I just tell her where not to step." He handed her the warm water. She took it with both hands, savoring the heat seeping into her palms. She looked at him over the rim of the cup, in the firelight. The sharp angles of his face were softened. He had removed his hat, and his black hair fell loose around his shoulders. He looked wild, yes, but there was a profound stillness to him that she found settling. "Why do you do this?" Clara asked. "You do not know me. You could have given me to them and taken the reward. There is surely a reward." Kai poked the fire with a stick. Sparks swirled up into the darkness. "I do not like men who hunt women, and I do not like men who use the law as a whip." "You have seen it before," she guessed. "I was a scout for the army," Kai said, his gaze distant. "I saw many things. I saw men draw lines on maps and call it civilization. I saw them burn cornfields to starve my people into submission. Violence is easy. Clara, it is cheap. Building something, that is hard." He looked at her then, his eyes dark and direct. "I am saving money. $300 more, and I can buy the deed to a valley south of here. Good grass, water that runs all year. I want to raise horses. Not for the army, but for working. I want to wake up in the morning and not hear a bugle or a gunshot. I just want to hear the wind in the grass." Clara listened, mesmerized. It was a simple dream, but the way he spoke of it made it sound like a prayer. "It sounds wonderful," she whispered. "It is necessary." Kai said, "A man without a place is just a leaf in the storm." He reached into his pack and broke a piece of hardtack, offering her the larger half. She took it, realizing she was ravenous. As she ate, she watched his hands. They were scarred and strong, yet he handled the wood and the food with a surprising delicacy. "I have never been this close to a man," she said suddenly. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. She blushed, the heat rising in her neck. "I mean, not like this, alone." Kai stopped chewing. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You are safe here." "I know," Clara said, and she realized it was true. That is what is strange. In Denver, with Mr. Garrett, he wore fine suits. He smelled of cologne, but I was never safe. He would corner me in the hallway. He would stand too close, breathing on my neck, telling me how lucky I was that he gave me work. He made me feel small, dirty. She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her skirt around her legs. "I have always been shy. My mother raised me to be invisible because invisible women do not get into trouble. I have never known a man's touch that was not grabbing or pushing. I do not know how to be anything but afraid." It was a confession of innocence, but also of deep trauma. She was telling him she was untouched, not as a prize to be won, but as a wound that had never been allowed to heal. Kai looked at her across the flames. The firelight danced in her eyes, which were wide and vulnerable. He felt a fierce protective instinct rise in his chest, an anger at the men who had made this gentle creature feel like prey. "You are not invisible now," Kai said softly. The air between them seemed to charge with a sudden, silent energy. It was not the predatory tension Clara was used to. It was something else, a recognition. Two lonely people huddled against the vast, cold indifference of the world. Clara looked at his lips, then quickly down at her hands. "Thank you," she said. "For the fire, for the water." "Eat," Kai said, his voice rougher than before. "You need strength." He stood up and moved to the entrance of the overhang, looking out into the swirling snow. He needed the cold air on his face. He needed to remember who he was and who she was. She was a white woman, a complication, a danger. He was a Navajo with a dream that hung by a thread. But when he looked back at her, curled up by the small fire, trying to mend a tear in her skirt with a thorn she had found, he knew he was already in too deep. The storm raged outside, a chaotic fury of ice and wind. But inside the small circle of light, the fire burned steady and true. It was a small thing. That fire. It could be stamped out with a single boot, yet it was the only thing keeping the dark at bay. Kai turned back to the night. "The road to the south is washed out," he said over his shoulder. "We cannot go back to the trading post. Silas cannot hide you if the deputy returns with a warrant." "Then where?" Clara asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Milford Crossing." Kai said, "The town, but that is where they are from. That is where the danger is." "It is also where the telegraph office is," Kai said, turning to face her. "And the records, that letter you have, the fake one. If we can prove it was forged, if we can prove Garrett is running a fraud, the deputy loses his power. A lie only works in the dark. Clara, we have to drag it into the sun." Clara stood up. She looked terrified. The idea of walking into the lion's den made her knees weak. But she looked at Kai at the solid, unwavering set of his shoulders, and she nodded. "I cannot be a runaway forever," she said. "I want to choose where I belong." "Then we ride at first light," Kai said. He sat back down, but he kept his distance, leaning against the cold stone wall while she took the warmth of the fire. They sat in silence as the storm howled, bound together by the danger and the quiet. Fragile trust growing between them like a seed in winter earth. The town of Milford Crossing was less a town and more a collection of weathered buildings huddled together against the wind, as if they were afraid of the vast emptiness surrounding them. The main street was a river of churned mud, flanked by a boardwalk that had seen better days. When Kai and Clara rode in, the midday sun was trying to break through the lingering gray of the storm, casting a harsh, flat light on the puddles. They did not arrive unnoticed. The sight of a Navajo man on a tired bay mare, with a white woman seated before him, acted like a stone thrown into a stagnant pond. Conversation stopped on the porches. A blacksmith lowered his hammer. A woman shaking a rug out of a second-story window froze, the dust hanging in the air like suspended judgment. Clara felt the weight of their eyes. It was a physical pressure, heavier than the wet wool of her dress. She shrank back against Kai's chest, trying to make herself smaller. "Keep your head up," Kai murmured, his voice a low vibration against her back. "If you look like a victim, they will treat you like one." He guided the horse toward the hitching rail in front of a general store marked Harlan's Dry Goods. As he dismounted and reached up to help Clara down, a man stepped off the boardwalk to block their path. It was the local deputy, though not the one who had chased them in the mountains. This one was younger, with a nervous twitch in his eye and a hand resting on his gun belt. "You there?" the deputy said, addressing Kai but looking at Clara with a mix of curiosity and disdain. "We do not allow Indians on the main thoroughfare without a pass, and we surely do not allow them to harass white ladies." Kai stood his ground. He did not posture, but his stillness was more intimidating than any threat. "She is not being harassed. She is a customer." "I am with him," Clara said. Her voice was thin, but she forced the words out. He saved my life in the storm." The deputy sneered. "Is that so? Well, he can wait by the troughs in the alley." "You, miss, look like you need to speak to decent folk." Kai looked at Clara. He gave a barely perceptible nod. "Go inside. I will see to the horse." Clara hesitated, terrified to be separated from him, but she understood the unspoken command. Making a scene here would only get Kai arrested or shot. She stepped onto the boardwalk, her boots scraping off the heavy mud, and pushed open the door to the store. Inside, it smelled of coffee beans, calico, and lye soap. Behind the counter stood a woman who looked as if she had been carved from oak. Mrs. Harlan was in her 50s, wearing a severe black dress and an apron that was blindingly white. She watched Clara enter with sharp, intelligent eyes. "You look like something the cat dragged in and refused to eat." "Mrs." Harlan said. Her tone was not unkind, merely factual. I need to sit down." Clara said, "Mrs." Harlan gestured to a stool by the pot-belly stove. "Sit, I will get you tea." "You are the girl the men were asking about yesterday. The runaway." Clara stiffened. "I am not a runaway. I am a woman who was lied to." "Mrs." Harlan poured a cup of tea from a kettle on the stove and handed it to Clara. "Around here, honey, the difference between a lie and the truth usually depends on who is holding the gun. Drink." The door opened, and Kai slipped in. He moved silently, staying near the shadows of the dry goods shelves. The deputy was likely watching the street, not the door. Kai placed a few coins on the counter. "I need gloves, small ones, deerskin if you have it, and ammunition for a Winchester." "Mrs." Harlan looked at the money, then at Kai, then at Clara's raw, red hands, which were wrapped around the teacup. She reached under the counter and pulled out a pair of soft, sturdy work gloves. "For her, Mrs.?" Harlan asked. Kai nodded. "Take them, Mrs." Harlan said, pushing the coins back toward him. "And take the girl out the back way if you have any sense. Deputy Thorne has been spending a lot of time at the telegraph office this morning. He received a wire from Denver about an hour ago. Something about a reward." Clara looked up, her heart hammering. "From Mr. Garrett." "The wire was from a man named Garrett, yes." "Mrs." Harlan confirmed. "He wired $50 to the sheriff's office to hold a woman matching your description for protective custody until he arrives." Kai stepped forward, the low light catching the hard line of his jaw. "May I see the paper you use for receipts?" "Mrs." Harlan raised an eyebrow, but tore a sheet from her ledger book. Kai took it and laid it next to the fake marriage letter Clara had produced from her pocket. "Clara," Kai said, "look at the letter. Hold it up to the light." Clara did so. Through the worn paper, a faint watermark was visible. It was a crest of an eagle holding a scale. "I know this mark," Clara whispered. "It is from the Denver City Press, Mr. Garrett." He had boxes of this paper in his office. He used it for his eviction notices. He said it looked official enough to scare people who could not read well. "He wrote the letter," Kai said grimly. "He lured you out here to a fake address so you would be stranded. Then he sends the law to rescue you and drag you back as a debtor." "It is a trap," Clara said, her voice trembling. "It was a trap from the very beginning, and the trap is about to close." "Mrs." Harlan said, looking out the front window. "Thorne is coming across the street, and he has brought 2 friends." Kai looked at the back door. "Is there a way out through the alley?" "Yes, Mrs." Harlan said, "but they will be watching the ends of the street." "I have a friend," Kai said. "Elias. He drives the mail wagon. Is he in town?" "He is at the livery stable, likely drunk or sleeping." "Mrs." Harlan replied. "He owes me a favor." Kai said. He turned to Clara. "Put on the gloves." Clara pulled the leather gloves over her battered hands. They were soft and smelled of earth. It was a small thing, a purchase of a few dollars. But to her, it felt like armor. He had thought of her hands. "What are we going to do?" she asked. "We are going to make a mess," Kai said. 10 minutes later, chaos erupted on Main Street. A team of mules, supposedly being hitched to the mail wagon, suddenly broke loose. They stampeded down the muddy thoroughfare, braying loudly and kicking up clods of earth. One of the mules slammed into the support post of the sheriff's porch, bringing down a sign and sending the deputies scrambling for safety. In the confusion, a buckboard wagon driven by a heavily bearded man, Elias, rattled out of the livery alley, cutting off Deputy Thorne's line of sight. "Go!" Elias shouted, cracking his whip. Kai and Clara sprinted from the back of Mrs. Harlan's store. They did not go to the hitching rail where the mare was watched. Instead, they vaulted into the back of Elias's moving wagon, hiding under a tarp that smelled of grain and oil. Gunshots rang out warning shots, fired into the air, but Elias did not stop. He drove the wagon hard out of town, past the last shacks, and into the scrubland. 2 miles out, in the shelter of a dry wash, Elias reined in the sweating horses. "That is as far as I go. Kai!" Elias wheezed, wiping his brow. "Thorne will figure it out soon enough." Kai jumped down and helped Clara out. "You did good. Elias, I did foolish." Elias grunted. He reached under the seat and pulled out a leather satchel. "Here, I took this from the office while they were chasing the mules. It is the mail packet Thorne was supposed to collect from the stagecoach tomorrow. I figured if Garrett is paying him, the instructions would be in here." Kai took the satchel. "Thank you. Do not thank me. Just do not get caught. They will hang you. Kai, her they will just shame. But you, they will hang." Elias turned the wagon around and rumbled back toward town, leaving them alone in the vast, cooling desert. "We have to walk to the ridge," Kai said. "I have a cache there, supplies, and we can circle back for the mare later." They walked until the sun went down. The temperature plummeted. The desert, so hot and bright by day, turned into a landscape of blue shadows and freezing wind. They made camp in a cluster of boulders. There was no fuel for a fire this time, and they dared not light one so close to town. They sat huddled together under the single blanket Kai had in his cache. Somewhere in the darkness, a wolf howled. Then another. They were closer than before. Clara felt Kai tense. He shifted, placing himself between her and the open desert. He drew his knife, the metal glinting in the starlight. "Are they hunting us?" Clara whispered. "They are hunting anything that is weak," Kai said. "Stay behind me." A pair of yellow eyes appeared in the brush. Then another pair. The pack was testing them. Kai stood up. He did not shout. He did not run. He simply expanded his presence, stomping his boot on the hard rock and letting out a sharp, guttural sound that was half growl, half shout. He threw a stone with deadly accuracy, hitting the lead wolf in the flank. The wolf yelped and scrambled back. The pack milled around, sensing that this prey was not helpless. After a tense standoff that lasted 10 minutes, they turned and trotted away into the night. Kai sat back down, letting out a long breath. "They are gone. You were not afraid," Clara said. "I was terrified," Kai admitted, his voice tight. He winced as he shifted his weight. Clara noticed the dark stain spreading on the sleeve of his shirt, just below the shoulder. "You are bleeding," she gasped. "It is nothing. A graze, from when we left the store. A splinter or a bullet. I do not know." "Let me see." Clara took charge. Her shyness evaporated in the face of necessity. She made him take off his coat and roll up his shirt sleeve. The wound was a shallow furrow along his bicep, angry and red, but not deep. "I need water," she said. Kai handed her the canteen. She poured water onto a strip of cloth she tore from her petticoat the second time she had sacrificed her clothing for their survival. She cleaned the wound with gentle, precise strokes. Her hands, clad in the new leather gloves, were steady. Kai watched her. He was used to tending his own wounds, or having them tended by rough men who poured whiskey on them and laughed. He was not used to this focused, tender silence. "It will need a stitch or two to close properly," Clara said, examining the cut. "But for now, I can bind it." She dressed the wound and then looked at his shirt. The fabric was torn. Without asking, She took out her needle and the spool of blue thread from her pocket. "You cannot stitch it while I am wearing it," Kai said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I can if you sit still," Clara retorted. She leaned in close. He could smell the scent of her rainwater and fear and something sweet, like dried flowers. She began to sew the tear in his sleeve. It was an intimate act. Her head bent near his shoulder, her breath warm against his skin. She was mending him. She was using the only skill she had to put a barrier between him and the elements. "There," she said softly, biting the thread to cut it. "It is not a perfect color match, but it will hold." Kai looked at the small, neat blue stitches against the rough gray wool of his shirt. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Thank you," he said. He reached for the leather satchel Elias had given them. "Now, let us see what Mr. Garrett purchased with his $50. He opened the bag and pulled out a thick, black ledger book. It was not a government record. It was a private notebook. Kai opened it to the marked pages. He held it so the moonlight fell on the text. Clara gasped. It was a list of names. Sarah M., sent to Laramie. Debt $200, price $400. Emily J., sent to Deadwood. Debt $150, price $300. And at the bottom of the last page, Clara W., sent to Milford Crossing. Debt $500, retained for personal collection. "He is selling us," Clara whispered, horror making her voice shake. "He creates the debt, sends us away, and then sells the debt to brothels or men who want servants." "It is trafficking," Kai said, his voice cold as the stone beneath them. "Slave trading under a different name." He pointed to a folded letter tucked inside the ledger. It was a draft of the instructions to Deputy Thorne. The handwriting was distinctive, sharp, looping letters. Kai pulled out the fake marriage letter from his pocket and placed it side by side with the ledger. Even in the dim light, the match was undeniable. The same hand that had promised Clara a home had written the price of her freedom. "This is it," Kai said. "This is the proof. Not just that he lied, but that he is running a criminal enterprise across state lines. The federal marshals will care about this. The judges in Salt Lake will care about this." Clara touched the ledger. Her finger traced her own name. She looked up at Kai, and her eyes were no longer the eyes of a victim. They were the eyes of a witness. "We cannot just run," she said. "If we run, he will do this to another girl, and another." "No," Kai agreed. "We do not run. We go back to Milford Crossing, but this time, we do not go as a runaway and a scout. We go as the prosecution." He closed the ledger with a snap that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet night. The wind howled around them, but the fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They had the weapon they needed. Now, they just had to live long enough to use it. The morning sun burned through the remnants of the storm, turning the muddy streets of Milford Crossing into a steaming, churning bog. The town was awake, but it was not the sleepy, rhythmic awakening of a normal day. There was a tension in the air, a vibration that traveled through the soles of boots and the hooves of horses. Kai and Clara rode into town not from the open road, but from the tree line behind the church, circling back to the main thoroughfare. Kai had cleaned the blood from his arm, though the wound throbbed with every heartbeat. Clara sat before him, her spine rigid. She wore the deerskin gloves he had bought her, and her hands were clasped tightly over the black ledger resting in her lap. They did not have to look far for their enemy. A crowd had already gathered in front of the sheriff's office. In the center of the mud-slicked street stood a buggy that looked far too expensive for this mining district. Standing beside it was a man who looked equally out of place. He wore a charcoal suit that was impeccably tailored, a silk vest, and a bowler hat. He was clean-shaven, smelling of bay rum and city confidence. It was Mr. Garrett. Beside him stood Deputy Thorne, looking smug and patting the holster at his hip. "I tell you, Sheriff," Garrett was saying, his voice projecting clearly to the assembled townsfolk, "it is a matter of great distress to me. The girl is unwell, hysteria. The doctor in Denver called it. She stole $500 from my safe and fled in the night. I have come only to ensure her safety and the return of my property. The sheriff, a weary man named Miller who had seen too many winters and too few paydays, scratched his beard. Well, Mr. Garrett, we have not seen her since yesterday, but if she is a thief, the law will handle it. The law is too slow for a sick woman, Garrett insisted, smoothing his lapels. I have a carriage ready to take her back to the sanitarium. Kai nudged the bay mare forward. The horse stepped out from the alleyway and onto the main street. The sound of hooves sucking at the mud caused heads to turn. She is not sick, Kai said. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of stone. The crowd parted. A ripple of murmurs went through them, shock, mostly, to see the Navajo scout returning so boldly after the previous day's chase. Garrett turned. His eyes narrowed as they landed on Kai, then shifted to Clara. A smile that looked like a baring of teeth spread across his face. Ah, Garrett said, spreading his hands. There she is. And in the company of a savage? My poor dear, you must be terrified. He took a step forward, his boots sinking into the muck. Come down. Clara, come to me. The nightmare is over. Clara felt the old panic rising in her throat, a bile tide of fear. She remembered the smell of his office, the sound of the lock clicking shut, the heavy weight of his hand on her shoulder. But then she felt Kai's chest against her back solid, warm, and breathing steady. She felt the heavy ledger under her hands. She was not the same woman who had fainted in the snow. Help her down, Garrett commanded Kai, his tone shifting to one of the master to servant. And then Deputy Thorne will discuss your punishment for kidnapping a white woman. Kai did not move to help her. He simply waited. This was the moment. If he spoke for her, she remained a child. If he fought for her, she remained a prize. She had to take the first step. Clara swung her leg over the saddle horn. She slid down into the mud. She did not look at the ground. She looked straight at the man who had haunted her steps for 1,000 miles. I was not kidnapped, Clara said. Her voice trembled, but the words were clear. And I am not sick. Clara, please, Garrett said, his voice dripping with condescension. Do not make a scene. You are confused. The money you took. I took my wages, Clara shouted. The volume of her own voice surprised her, and it silenced the crowd. 2 months of wages you refused to pay, and I am not returning to Denver with you. She is delirious, Garrett said to the sheriff, shaking his head sadly. Sheriff, arrest the Indian. I will take charge of the girl. No one is taking charge of me, Clara declared. She lifted the black ledger high in the air. This man is not a concerned employer. He is a trader of human beings. A gasp ran through the crowd. In the West, calling a man a slaver was an accusation that drew blood. That book is stolen property, Garrett snapped, his composure cracking for a fraction of a second. Thorne, get that book! Deputy Thorne stepped forward, his hand on his revolver. Hand it over. Miss Evidence. Kai dropped from the saddle. He moved with a fluidity that made Thorne hesitate. Kai did not draw a weapon. He simply stood between Thorne and Clara. The book stays with her, Kai said. This is a town matter. Indian. Thorne spat. Step aside or I will put a hole in you. The tension stretched tight as a bowstring. The town was dividing before their eyes. Some of the men, hard-bitten miners and ranchers, looked at Kai with hostility. He was an outsider, a threat to the order of things. But the women, the wives and mothers who knew the hardness of life, were looking at Clara. Let her speak. The voice came from the boardwalk. Mrs. Harlan marched out of her store, wearing her apron like armor. She walked straight into the mud and stood beside Clara. If she has something to say, she says it. Mrs. Harlan challenged the sheriff. Since when do we take the word of a stranger from Denver over a woman standing in our own street? Clara opened the ledger. Her hands shook, but she found the page. He sells debt, Clara said, reading from the columns. He traps women with false promises of work or marriage, creates debts they cannot pay, and then sends them to mining camps and brothels to work it off. He calls it contract labor. I call it slavery. She pulled out the letter, the one signed by the fake Arthur Wilson. He wrote this to lure me here, to a husband who does not exist. Look at the paper. It matches the receipts in this book. Look at the handwriting. Garrett laughed, a harsh, barking sound. This is absurd. A forgery created by a desperate thief and her savage lover. Is it? Clara asked. She turned the ledger around to face the sheriff. Sheriff Miller, look at the last entry. My name. Beside it, the instruction retained for personal collection. Sheriff Miller stepped forward. He took the book. He looked at the entry. He looked at the letter Clara held up. Then he looked at Garrett. This is your handwriting. Mr. Garrett, the sheriff asked. I deny it, Garrett said smoothly. She could have copied it. And the detail, Kai spoke up from behind Clara. The letter mentions the marriage agency, the Rocky Mountain Matrimonial Agency, but Clara never told anyone in this town the name of the agency. Only Silas at the post saw the letter. Kai locked eyes with Garrett. So, how did you know to wire Deputy Thorne and tell him to look for a mail-order bride unless you wrote the lie yourself? Garrett froze. He realized his mistake. He had known too much. The mood of the crowd shifted. The miners looked at Garrett with disgust. They were rough men, violent men, but they despised a cheat, and they despised a man who preyed on women even more. Sheriff, Garrett said, his voice rising in pitch. This is a conspiracy. That Indian is dangerous. He attacked my men yesterday. Your men attacked us, Clara said. And we have the bullet holes in Kai's coat to prove it. Sheriff Miller closed the ledger. He looked at Deputy Thorne. Thorne, why did you not log the wire from Mr. Garrett in the office record? Thorne's face went pale. It was a private matter. Sheriff, a favor. A favor worth $50, Kai asked. Thorne's hand twitched near his gun. That is enough. Sheriff Miller said. Thorne, give me your badge. Mr. Garrett, you will come with me to the office while we verify these documents? Garrett looked around. He saw the angry faces of the townspeople. He saw the trap closing. He was a man who used paper to destroy lives, but now paper was destroying him. He did the only thing a coward could do. No! Garrett screamed. He lunged not at the sheriff, but at Clara. It happened in a blur. Garrett grabbed Clara by the hair, yanking her backward. She screamed, dropping the ledger. He pulled a small, snub-nosed derringer from his vest pocket and pressed it to her temple. Back off, Garrett shrieked. Back off or I will kill her right here. The crowd scattered, women screaming, men reaching for weapons but freezing when they saw the gun at Clara's head. Kai did not freeze. He went perfectly still, his muscles coiled. Get the horses, Garrett yelled at Thorne. Thorne, get the wagon. But Thorne had already turned tail and run into the alley, abandoning his paymaster. I am taking her, Garrett snarled, dragging Clara backward toward the livery stable alley. She belongs to me. She signed the contract. Clara clawed at his arm, but he was strong with panic. He dragged her into the shadows between the dry goods store and the saloon. Kai, she screamed. Kai moved. He did not run in a straight line. He vaulted over the hitching rail, scrambled up the support post of the saloon porch, and ran across the roof. Garrett was dragging Clara toward his buggy, which was parked at the rear of the alley. He was fumbling with the reins with one hand while holding the gun to her head with the other. Get in, he shouted, shoving her toward the carriage. Kai dropped from the roof. He landed not on Garrett, but on the buggy, his boots slamming into the wooden seat. The impact spooked the horse, which reared and bolted forward a few feet. Garrett stumbled, his balance broken. The gun wavered. That was all Kai needed. He did not use a gun. He used his body. He leaped from the carriage, tackling Garrett into the mud. The derringer discharged into the dirt with a muffled pop. They rolled. Garrett clawed and bit, fighting with the desperation of a rat. But Kai fought with the efficiency of a wolf. He blocked a punch, twisted Garrett's wrist until the bone snapped, and drove his knee into the man's solar plexus. Garrett gasped, the air leaving his lungs. Kai pinned him down. He drew his knife, the heavy hunting knife he used to skin deer. He pressed the blade against Garrett's throat. A single drop of blood welled up around the steel. "Kai, no!" The voice was Clara's. Kai froze. The rage was a red haze in his vision. He wanted to end it. He wanted to cut the throat of the monster who had terrified her. It would be justice. It would be clean. "Do not kill him," Clara said. She was standing over them, her dress torn, mud in her hair, breathing hard. "He is not worth your life. If you kill him, they will hang you. And he wins." Kai looked up at her. She was not looking away. She was commanding him. "Let him up," Clara said. Kai slowly withdrew the knife. He grabbed Garrett by the lapels of his expensive suit and hauled him to his feet. He shoved him hard against the wall of the stable. "You are lucky," Kai whispered, his face inches from Garrett's. "She has more mercy than I do." Sheriff Miller and half a dozen men came running into the alley, guns drawn. "Drop it, Kai!" the sheriff shouted. Kai held his hands up, palms open. "It is done." The sheriff grabbed Garrett, who was wheezing and clutching his broken wrist. "Mr. Garrett, you are under arrest for kidnapping, assault, and fraud." Two men grabbed Garrett and dragged him away. He was sobbing now, his dignity stripped away along with his power. Kai stood alone in the alley. His chest was heaving. He looked at Clara. She walked over to him. She reached out and took his hand, the hand that had held the knife. She squeezed it. "Thank you," she whispered. They walked back out to the main street. The ledger lay in the mud where Clara had dropped it. "Mrs." Harlan picked it up and dusted it off. Sheriff Miller was shackling Garrett to the post outside the office. He looked at Clara. "Miss Whitfield," the sheriff said, "I have to be honest. The circuit judge is not due for 2 weeks. If you press charges, you have to stay here. You have to testify. It will be ugly. His lawyers will come from Denver. They will drag your name through the dirt." He looked at the stagecoach that had just pulled in at the end of the street. "The driver is a friend of mine. I can get you a free ticket to California. You can disappear, start over. No one would blame you." Clara looked at the stagecoach. It was the easy way out. It was the way to become invisible again. Then she looked at Kai. He was standing by his horse, watching her. He would not ask her to stay. He respected her too much to claim her. But the look in his eyes was a raw, open wound of hope. She looked at the townspeople. They were watching her, waiting to see if she would run. "No," Clara said. Her voice was steady. "I am done running." She turned to the sheriff. "I will press charges. I will testify. And I will make sure every name in that book is read aloud in court." "It will be hard living here," the sheriff warned. "People talk. Let them talk," Clara said. "I have a trade. I can sew. I will work until the trial." "Mrs." Harlan stepped forward. "She can stay with me. I have a spare room. And God knows I need help with the mending." The sheriff nodded, a newfound respect in his eyes. "All right, then." He turned to the crowd. "Show is over. Go back to your business." The crowd began to disperse, but the atmosphere had changed. They looked at Garrett with contempt. Yes, but when they looked at Kai, the feeling was different. Before, he was just an Indian who came and went, a part of the landscape. Now, they had seen him take down a wealthy white man. They had seen his violence, controlled and lethal. They had seen a white woman choose his side over her own kind. A man spat on the ground as he walked past Kai. "Watch yourself. Scout, you are walking tall today, but the sun sets early." Kai ignored him. He walked over to Clara. "You chose the hard path," he said. "I chose the path that keeps me here." Clara replied. She reached up and touched his cheek, uncaring of who saw. "I told you, I want to choose where I belong." Kai covered her hand with his own. For a moment, they were the only two people in the world. "Then we will face it," Kai said. "Whatever comes, but as they walked toward Mrs. Harlan's store, Kai felt the eyes on his back. The danger of Mr. Garrett was gone, but a new danger had taken its place. The town had seen a Navajo warrior defeat a white man of status, and for many of them, that was a sin far worse than kidnapping. The climax had broken the storm, but the floodwaters were still rising. The ride back to the high country was different from the frantic flight that had preceded it. The sky was a piercing, unblemished blue, the kind that only existed at this altitude, where the air was thin and smelled of pine resin and dry earth. The mud from the storm had dried into a hard, cracked crust, cementing the memory of the chaos into the ground itself. Kai Yazzie and Clara Whitfield did not speak much as the elevation climbed. The silence between them was not heavy, but it was filled with things that had not yet been said. They had won a battle in the mud of Milford Crossing, but the war for a life together was a quieter, longer siege. When they reached the trading post, Silas was waiting on the porch. He did not wave. He stood with his arms crossed, chewing on the stem of his pipe. Kai reined in the mare. He helped Clara down. Her legs were steady now. She had changed in the last 48 hours. The trembling girl who had fainted in the snow was gone, replaced by a woman who walked with a careful, deliberate precision. "You stirred up a hornet's nest, Kai," Silas said, his voice low. He looked at Clara, tipping his head slightly. "Ma'am, I hear you stood tall." "I stood where I had to," Clara replied softly. Silas nodded. "The sheriff took Garrett to the county lockup. But the town is buzzing. People are saying things, ugly things, about a white woman and a Navajo living out here." He looked at Kai significantly. "You watch your back. The law might be on your side for a minute, but prejudice lasts a lifetime." "I know," Kai said. "We are going up to the cabin." "Take extra flour," Silas said, kicking a sack near the door. "And coffee. You might want to stay off the road for a while." They rode another 3 miles up a hidden trail, past the tree line, to the piece of land Kai had been saving for. It was not a ranch yet. It was a dream sketched in rough logs and split-rail fences. There was a small cabin, built by Kai's own hands, sturdy and tight against the wind. A corral held 2 other horses, wild-eyed mustangs he was gentling. For the first few days, they moved around each other like 2 planets trying to find an orbit. The intimacy of the chase, the adrenaline that had bound them together, had faded, leaving behind the mundane reality of survival. Kai worked with a feverish intensity. He repaired the roof where the winter snows had weakened it. He split wood until his hands were blistered. He was terrified. He had brought this woman into his world, a world of dirt floors and wind that cut like a knife. He watched her from the corner of his eye as she swept the cabin or tried to organize his meager supplies. He waited for her to realize she had made a mistake. He waited for her to leave. Clara, in turn, fought her own demons. She felt useless. She knew how to sew silk and hem velvet, skills that were laughable here. She saw Kai working, sweating, providing, and she felt the weight of her own dependence. Was she just another burden, a stray he had picked up because of his honor, whom he would eventually resent one afternoon? The tension broke over a skillet of cornmeal. Clara had insisted on cooking. She wanted to contribute. She mixed the cornmeal and water, trying to remember how her mother had done it, but she had no milk, no eggs, and the wood stove was temperamental. The fire was too hot. When she turned the cakes, they were black on the outside and raw in the middle. Smoke filled the small cabin. Clara stared at the ruined food. Tears, hot and stupid, pricked her eyes. It was just cornmeal, but it felt like a verdict on her worth. The door opened, and Kai stepped in, bringing a gust of cold air. He stopped, smelling the smoke. He looked at the skillet. Clara turned away, wiping her eyes furiously with the back of her hand. "I am sorry. I have wasted the food. I do not know how to cook on this stove. I do not know how to do anything here." Kai walked over to the stove. He took the skillet from the heat. He picked up one of the burnt cakes, broke it open, and inspected the doughy center. "It has character," Kai said. Clara looked at him, startled. It is inedible. No, Kai said. He took a bite of the burnt crust. He chewed thoughtfully, the crunch echoing in the quiet room. It is crunchy and soft, 2 meals in one. Clara stared at him for a second, and then a small, watery laugh escaped her lips. You are a terrible liar. Kai Yazi. I'm a survivor, Kai said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. I have eaten lizards and boiled boots. This is a feast. He set the cake down and looked at her, his expression turning serious. You are not a maid. Clara, you are not here to serve me. You are learning. The stove is tricky. Tomorrow, I will show you the draft control. I feel so useless, Clara whispered. You patched my coat, Kai said, pointing to the garment hanging on a peg. You stood up to a man with a gun. You are not useless. The next day, a visitor arrived. She came on foot, walking up the trail with a steady, rhythmic gait that ate up the miles. She was an older Navajo woman, her face a map of deep wrinkles, her hair white and tied back with wool yarn. She wore a velvet blouse the color of the sunset and a long, heavy skirt. Kai was in the corral with a colt. He stopped when he saw her. Auntie Nez. She was not his blood aunt, but she was an elder of his clan, a woman who held the memory of their people. She ignored Kai and walked straight to where Clara was sitting on the porch, mending a tear in a grain sack. Clara stood up, nervous. She smoothed her skirt. Hello. Auntie Nez did not smile. Her black eyes, sharp as a hawk's, swept over Clara. She looked at her pale skin, her slender frame, her city boots. She looked at the way Clara held the needle. You are the one, Auntie Nez said. Her English was heavily accented, clipped and precise. I am Clara, she replied. He fights for you, Auntie Nez said, tilting her head toward Kai. He brings trouble to his door for you. Why, I do not know, Clara stammered. He is a good man. Good men die young in this country, Auntie Nez said. She reached out and took Clara's hand. Her grip was like iron. She turned Clara's palm up. Soft, like butter. Clara flushed. I am a seamstress. Can you sew water? Auntie Nez asked. I do not understand. Here, water is life. You waste a drop. You steal from tomorrow, the old woman said. She let go of Clara's hand and pointed to the horizon, where the red rocks met the blue sky. The wind here does not stop. It dries the skin. It dries the soul. If you want to stay, you must be like the juniper, twisted, hard, but deep roots. Clara looked at the fierce old woman. She realized this was a test. She could shrink away, or she could listen. Teach me, Clara said. I do not want to be soft. Auntie Nez studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded once. She sat down on the porch step. Sit. I show you how to clean the beans without water. I show you how to find the salt bush. For the rest of the afternoon, Clara sat at the elder's feet. She learned which plants could stop bleeding and which could kill. She learned that you never look a coyote in the eye, and you never speak of the dead after dark. She learned that survival was not about fighting the land, but submitting to it. When Auntie Nez left, walking back down the trail as the sun began to dip, she stopped by the corral. She has spirit, Auntie Nez said to Kai. Small spirit, like a mouse. But a mouse survives the winter when the bear starves. It was the highest praise she could offer. That evening, the air turned cold, the temperature dropping 20 degrees in an hour. Kai brought in an armful of pinon wood. The smell of the burning wood was sweet and incense-like. They ate a simple stew properly cooked this time, thanks to Kai's instruction. Afterward, the silence settled in again, but it was warmer now. Kai sat by the fire, cleaning his rifle. Clara sat on a rug she had beaten the dust from, her knees pulled up to her chest. Silas says the stagecoach leaves for California on Tuesday, Kai said. He did not look at her. He looked at the rag in his hand. He can get a ticket. I can give you the money. You would be safe there. No rumors. No hard winters. Clara looked at him. She saw the tension in his shoulders. She realized he was giving her a way out. He was opening the door so she could leave without guilt. "Is that what you want?" Clara asked. "Do you want me to leave?" Kai stopped wiping the gun. He set it down. He turned to look at her, and the raw honesty in his face took her breath away. "I want you to be happy," he said. "I cannot promise you an easy life here. Clara, I cannot promise you that people will be kind. I can only promise you truth. I will never own you. I will never tell you where you can walk or who you can be. But this dirt, this wind, it is all I have." Clara stood up. She walked over to him. She did not touch him, but she stood close enough to feel the heat radiating from him. "I do not want an easy life," she said. "I had an easy life in Denver, and it was a cage. I want a life that is mine." She took a deep breath. She had been thinking about this for days, ever since she saw the children at the trading post dirty, wild, and illiterate. "I want to stay," she said, "but not just as a guest. I want to work. There are children at the crossing. The miners' children, the Navajo children who hang around the post. They have no school. They have no one to teach them to read or to mend their clothes." Kai looked at her with surprise. "I can teach," Clara said, her voice growing stronger. "I can set up a corner in the trading post. I can teach them letters. I can teach the girls to sew. I can make a difference here. I can be useful." Kai slowly stood up. He towered over her, but he never made her feel small. "You would do that for this place?" "For us," Clara said, "so we can live here with our heads high." The wind howled outside, rattling the shutter, but inside, the fire popped and hissed. Clara looked down at her hands. They were clasped in front of her. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. There was one more thing she had to say. One wall she had to break down if they were to truly start a life. She looked up at him through her lashes. Her voice dropped to a whisper, barely audible over the fire. "Kai," she said, "there is something else. Mr. Garrett, he never touched me. Not in that way." Kai waited, his eyes soft, patient. "I have never been with a man," she stammered, the confession burning her cheeks. "I am virgin and shy." She said it because she trusted him. She said it not as an apology for her inexperience, but as a gift of her truth. She was offering him the one thing she had protected so fiercely. Kai looked at her. He saw the tremble in her lip, the bravery in her stance. He stepped closer. He reached out and cupped her face in his hands. His palms were rough, calloused from labor, but his touch was light as a feather. He nodded slowly. "Then I'll be gentle," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her. "And yours for life." He lowered his head. His lips brushed hers, tentative at first, a question asked and answered. Then, as she sighed and leaned into him, the kiss deepened. It was not the desperate, frantic collision of their escape. It was slow. It was deliberate. It was a seal on a promise that no judge or priest needed to witness. Clara wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her fingers in his hair. For the first time in her life, she was not afraid of a man's strength. She felt it surrounding her, not to crush, but to shield. Kai lifted her into his arms. She felt small and precious against him. He carried her toward the back of the room, away from the firelight, into the shadows where the wind could not reach them. The camera of the mind pulls back. The fire crackles, sending sparks up the chimney to join the stars. The sound of the wind softens, blending with the rhythm of two hearts finally beating in time. The scene fades to black, leaving only the warmth and the promise of a morning that will be different from all the mornings before. The next few days passed in a blur of quiet contentment. The harshness of the land had not changed, but their ability to withstand it had. Clara began her project with a stubborn determination. She cleared a corner of the storage room at Silas's trading post. She used crates for desks and charcoal for pencils. The first day, only 2 children showed up, a curious Navajo boy and the daughter of a local trapper. They looked at her with suspicion. Clara sat on a barrel. She picked up a piece of calico fabric and a needle. "Who wants to learn how to make a pouch for their treasures?" she asked. By the end of the week, there were 5 children. By the next week, there were 8. Kai watched her from the doorway one afternoon. She was laughing at something the trapper's daughter had said. Her hair was loose, escaping her bun. There was a smudge of charcoal on her nose. She looked tired, but she looked alive. He walked in. The children went quiet, looking at the tall, scarred scout with awe. "Class is over," Kai said, his eyes dancing with amusement. "The teacher has duties." "What duties?" Clara asked, wiping her hands. "I tried to make the stew," Kai admitted. "I believe I have created glue." The children giggled. Clara laughed, a free, ringing sound that filled the dusty room. "I'm coming," she said. They walked out of the trading post together. The sun was setting, painting the clouds in violent streaks of purple and gold. They walked toward the horses, their shoulders brushing. They did not run from the stares of the men on the porch. They acknowledged them with a nod and kept walking. They were not asking for permission to exist. They were simply existing. "Auntie Nez came by the cabin today," Kai said as he helped her onto the mare. "Oh," Clara asked. "Did she inspect my water usage?" "She left a basket," Kai said, "dried peaches, and a bag of salt." Clara smiled. It was a blessing. It was acceptance. "We will be all right. Kai," she said. Kai mounted behind her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, holding the reins. "Yes, we will." They turned the horse toward the mountain. They were not riding into a fairy tale. They were riding into hard work, cold winters, and a society that might never fully accept them. But as they ascended the trail, leaving the shadows of the valley behind, they were riding toward something real. They were riding home. The winter that year had been long and hard, a season that tested the timber of the cabin and the resolve of the two souls living within it. But as the earth turned, the grip of the cold began to loosen. The white drifts that had choked the passes turned into rushing, crystalline creeks, and the gray sky, which had hung over the valley like a shroud for months, finally broke apart to reveal a blue so deep it felt infinite. Spring arrived in the canyon not with a shout, but with a whisper of green. The morning mist that clung to the valley floor was no longer the heavy morning veil that Clara had seen on her first day in this wild country. It was light, translucent, shimmering with the promise of warmth. It rose from the damp earth like a prayer, carrying the scent of damp sagebrush and the sweet, resinous perfume of pine needles warming in the sun. Clara stood on the porch of the cabin, a steaming mug of coffee in her hands. She watched the mist swirl around the ankles of the horses in the paddock. She wore a simple dress of calico, one she had sewn herself, sturdy and practical, but she had embroidered small, yellow globe mallow flowers along the hem. It was a touch of vanity, perhaps, or perhaps it was a declaration that beauty could exist even here, in the harshness of the rock and dust. She heard the heavy tread of boots behind her. Kai stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag. He had been up since before dawn, tending to the livestock. "The creek is running high," Kai observed, his voice rough with the morning quiet. "The crossing will be muddy. Silas is bringing the mail today," Clara said. She did not look at him, but she leaned slightly toward his presence, a magnetic pull that had become as natural as breathing. He said if the pass was clear, he would make the ride up. Kai nodded. He stood beside her, looking out at the land, the fear that had defined their early days, the constant scanning of the horizon for riders. The tension in every shadow had faded. It had not disappeared completely, for a scout never truly stops watching. But it had settled into a wary peace. "Whatever comes in that mail," Kai said quietly, "it changes nothing here." Clara looked at the cabin, at the smoke curling from the chimney, at the garden plot she had turned over with a spade, ready for planting. "No, it changes nothing here, but it changes how the world sees us." Silas arrived just before noon. His mule was mud-splattered to the knees, but the trader was in high spirits. He dismounted with a grunt, handing Kai a sack of grain and Clara a small, oilskin-wrapped packet. "From Denver," Silas said, tipping his battered hat. "Came in on the stage yesterday. The driver said it was marked urgent, but legal urgent, not trouble urgent." Clara took the packet. Her hands, now brown from the sun and calloused from the hoe, trembled slightly. She sat on the porch step to open it. Kai stood over her, his shadow falling across the paper to cut the glare of the sun. She broke the wax seal. It was not the fake seal of a general store this time. It was the official seal of the Colorado District Court. Clara read the document. Her eyes scanned the dense legal language, the words affidavit, exoneration, and dismissal. She let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for 6 months. "Mr. Garrett has been sentenced," she said, her voice steady. 10 years in the territorial prison. The judge reviewed the ledger. They found 12 other women. The charges against me, theft, breach of contract, they are all dismissed with prejudice. She looked up at Kai. "It says here Clara Whitfield is a free citizen, with no outstanding debts or warrants." Kai did not smile, but the tension in his jaw relaxed. He reached down and took the paper from her, reading it himself to be sure. He respected the written word, even if he did not always trust the men who wrote it. "Free," Kai repeated. "It means I can walk into town," Clara said. "It means I can sign my name to a deed or a letter and not be afraid." "You were free before the paper," Kai said. "But the paper makes it easier for the rest of the world to understand." The weeks that followed brought a new rhythm to their lives. With the legal threat dissolved, Kai shifted his focus from survival to building. He was no longer just a scout living between trips. He was a man with a stake in the land. He spent his days in the valley, working the herd. He had managed to capture and break a dozen wild mustangs over the winter. He did not break them with cruelty, as many of the ranchers did. He used the method of his people: patience, breath, and touch. He spent hours in the corral, just standing with the horses, letting them smell him, letting them understand that he was not a predator. By late spring, the horses were ready. He took 4 of the best geldings down to Milford Crossing to sell. The town had not transformed into a paradise of tolerance overnight. There were still men who spat when Kai walked by, and there were still women who pulled their skirts aside when they saw him. But the atmosphere had shifted. The trial of Garrett, even though it happened in Denver, had sent ripples through the territory. The local miners and settlers had been forced to look at their own prejudices. They had seen a savage act with honor, and a gentleman act like a monster. It was a lesson that sat uncomfortably in their stomachs, but it was a lesson nonetheless. When Kai rode into town with the horses, the blacksmith, a man named Miller, who had once refused to shoe Kai's mare, walked out to the street. "Those are fine-looking animals, Yazzie," Miller said, wiping soot from his forehead. "They are steady," Kai replied. "Good for the trails. I have a client looking for a mount, a doctor coming in from Salt Lake. Needs something that will not spook at a gunshot or a snake." "The bay on the left," Kai said. "He is calm, $70. It was a fair price, perhaps even a little high. A year ago, Miller would have laughed or tried to cheat him. Today, Miller nodded. "Bring him to the stable. I will have the cash." It was a small transaction, but it was a brick in the foundation of a new life. Kai was not begging for work. He was trading value for value. Meanwhile, Clara had expanded her small corner of the world. She rode down to the trading post 3 days a week. Her school had grown. It was no longer just the trapper's daughter and the Navajo boy. The wives of 2 local ranchers had asked if she could teach their sons to read the Bible. Clara did not lecture them on morality. She simply taught. She taught them that A was for apple and J was for justice. She taught them that a stitch in time saved 9, and that a person's worth was not written on their skin or in their bank account. One afternoon, Mrs. Harlan invited Clara to tea in the back room of the dry goods store. It was the first time Clara had been invited socially, not just as a refugee seeking shelter. "People are talking," Mrs. Harlan said, pouring the tea into china cups that seemed impossibly delicate for the surroundings. "They always talk," Clara said, taking a sip. "They are saying that Kai Yazzie is the only man in the territory who can train a horse without breaking its spirit." "Mrs. Harlan said, And they are saying that the schoolmistress has a backbone made of steel. Clara smiled. I learned from good teachers. You and the mountains. You have made a place for yourself. Clara. Mrs., Harlan said. It is not the place your mother likely wanted for you. And it is not the place the society pages in Denver would understand. But it is real. Yes, Clara said. It is real. The true test of their peace came not from the town, but from within the quiet moments at the cabin. Summer was approaching. The days were long and filled with the golden light of the high desert. One evening, after the work was done, Kai and Clara sat on the porch. The air was cooling rapidly, the heat of the day radiating back up from the red earth. Clara had been working on a project for weeks, hiding it in her sewing basket whenever Kai came near. Now, she brought it out. It was a piece of heavy canvas, hemmed and lined with blue cotton. On it, she had embroidered a scene. It was not a landscape, and it was not a Bible verse. It was a simple image of a pine tree standing against a wind, its roots deep and exposed. Holding onto the rock, above the tree, she had stitched a single star. She stood up and walked to the door of the cabin. There was a nail there, hammered into the log frame. She hung the canvas on it. What is this? Kai asked, stepping closer to inspect the work. It is a flag, Clara said. Every fort has a flag. Every ship has a flag. This is ours. Kai touched the thread. He traced the shape of the tree. He recognized it. It was the twisted juniper that grew on the ridge behind the cabin, the one that had survived drought and lightning for 100 years. It means we are not moving, Clara said. It means we are not hiding. This is our home. Kai looked at her. His eyes were dark and unreadable, but his hand reached out and took hers. He did not say anything for a long moment. Then, he turned and walked to the tack shed. He came back carrying his bridle, the one he used for his own mare, braided from horsehair and leather, adorned with the silver conchos his father had made. It was his most valuable possession, the tool of his trade and the symbol of his freedom. He hung the bridle on a peg right next to Clara's embroidery. The leather and the fabric hung side by side, the symbol of the wanderer and the symbol of the nester. Two different materials, two different histories, sharing the same wall, sheltered by the same roof. Winter will come again, Kai said, looking at the two objects. The snow will be deep. The work will be hard. We will have wood, Clara said. The creek might dry up in August. Kai warned. We will carry water from the spring, Clara countered. And people will stare, Kai said. They will whisper that we do not belong together. Let them whisper, Clara said. I only hear you. Kai turned to her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her against him. The stiffness that had defined him for so long, the armor he wore against the world, had finally melted away. I used to think freedom was being alone, Kai said. His voice was low, intimate, meant only for her and the twilight. I thought if no one knew my name, no one could own me. I thought if I had no walls, I could not be trapped. He rested his forehead against hers. But I was wrong, he whispered. Freedom is not standing in the empty desert. Freedom is the power to choose who walks through the door. It is choosing who you give your life to, not having it taken. Clara closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of his smoke, leather, and the open air. And you chose me. I chose you, Kai said, every day, for life. He kissed her then, a kiss that tasted of the future. It was not a fairy tale ending. There were no castles, no pots of gold. There was only the promise of labor, of seasons changing, of hardship shared and joy earned. It was a promise of cold mornings where they would warm each other, and hot afternoons where they would work side by side. It was a dream made of solid things, wood, water, flesh, and blood. The final image of the story was not one of stillness, but of motion. The sun was setting, casting long purple shadows across the canyon. The red rock cliffs glowed as if lit from within. Two riders moved along the ridge trail. Kai was on his bay mare, sitting tall and easy in the saddle. Beside him, riding a spirited roan gelding, was Clara. She did not ride side saddle, perched precariously as a lady should. She rode astride, her skirt split for riding, her boots secure in the stirrups, her back straight. They were not galloping in a panic. They were not fleeing from a posse or racing against a storm. They were moving at a steady trot, their horses keeping pace with one another. They passed the spot where they had first met the place where Clara had fallen in the dust. Broken and desperate, they did not stop to look at it. That ghost was gone. They rode past the trading post, where the smoke from Silas's chimney rose into the still air. They rode toward the high country, where the cabin waited with its flag of canvas and thread. As they crested the hill, the camera of the mind pulled back, turning them into silhouettes against the vast, burning canvas of the western sky. They were small against the landscape, just two specks in the immensity of the American West, but they were not lost. They were not running away. They were just going home. The screen fades to black. Outro. Thank you so much for listening to this story of the Wild West. I hope Kai and Clara's journey touched your heart as much as it did mine writing it. If you enjoyed this tale of grit and romance, please let me know in the comments below. I would love to know where you are listening from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales, and hit that like button. If you really want to support the channel and help more people hear this story, please press the hype button. Your support means the world to me and helps keep the campfire burning for more stories like this one. Thank you, and happy trails until we meet again.